It's a good spiritual successor to Symphony of the Night, just not as good. Let's take the creator of Symphony of the Night, Koji Igarashi, or Iga, on the coin faced opposite of Chris Avallone. Whereas the Lone takes specific ideas from fantasy or RPG folklore and turns them on their head,
Take Fall from Grace a Succubus and completely reverse that concept. Make her celibate, make her chaste, well-spoken, she's polite, she's one of the nicest people.
Koji takes every myth he can find and makes an entire game out of them. And then he just makes a crazy number of levels rehashing them all.
Slaughter succubi left and right, and they're the total sex pot.
He's like the Neil Gaiman of gameplay. What would happen if you had all this mythology in a room? Well, you'd have a giant spooky castle of evil creatures and magical items and all sorts of interlocking secrets to discover, which just works in side-scrolling.
Unacceptable!
So when Konami goes nearly bankrupt and fires their gaming division, there's still a desire for the original Metroidvania, or Igavania as he likes to call it. Iga then went to Kickstarter and everyone jumped on, including me. And it's finally paid off. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night is essentially Order of Ecclesia with a better told story with all the experience and most of the gameplay ideas from the Sorrow DS games. Instead of glyphs, you have shards, but it's still a looter grinder like all the other Castlevanias. The plot of the game is essentially combining Symphony of the Night's Richter with Order of Ecclesia's Albus, and you have to go on a journey to figure out what's going on with your old buddy and why he wants to demonize the world. The big event of summoning a giant castle killed a lot of people and you need to stop demons from spreading, or something along those lines. It doesn't really matter. The church gets involved, alchemists trying to help you too, and you kill everything that moves. Great. Sadly, the story is nearly irrelevant. There are 3 endings, but there's no drama or concern or for anything, really. David Hayter now is a samurai. That's cool.
Stop right there. I knew what you are. That ghastly air about you. You reek of sorcery, Shardbinder.
And they brought back the voice actor of Alucard, but now he's Orlox Dracul.
My name is Orlok Dracul, but you may call me OD.
You just had to have a vampire somewhere in the story. It has the typical B-movie type setting of a big old scary castle that somehow got summoned as a result of all these experiments alchemists were doing. The one thing I really liked about the setting, and that's not saying much in an Igavania style game, is that the castle was summoned on top of a series of secret laboratories the alchemists were using. The problem is, for example, one lab called the Oriental Sorcery Lab is near the top left of the map, and it feels like you're fighting some characters from the Uchiha clan who literally use ninja fire techniques. Sadly, there's no talk of warring alchemists or various plots therein, but it was a nice idea, just not focused in terms of storytelling, but more to do with level design. Again, that's the nature of the beast. There are a few key cutscenes, and most of the story is optional, told by discovered bookcases that have journal entries by our antagonist and other side characters, which is perhaps as good as it gets in these Igavania games, so you gotta give them that. Because of the mass market appeal of these kinds of games, everything is based around marketing, including the look of Dawn of Sorrow. This also goes into explaining the design of the main character Miriam. She was chosen because America and the weird political climate we're in now. But essentially it comes down to Iga loving Shanoa the most, and people liking women. That's about as deep as it gets. The stained glass motif makes her look special and be special, as she can control demons' powers just like Soma Cruz, because he's special. That's a good way of putting it. She's Soma Cruz with Shanoa's backstory, and you're good to go. They're just as feminine, minus the Ayami Kojima artwork. Think Symphony of the Night on crack. It's just not as good as, but it's more refined due to the pedigree and experience Iga has had on all the games after. And that's both a good and bad thing. For one, because it's refined, it's been tested, and Iga and fans know what works. There's all kinds of Street Fighter inputs. It's a fun experience. And because of that, it's bad. There's nothing really new, just more of the same. About, I'd say 80% of the game feels like a giant rehash of all the other games. And the project sort of had to be that way because of the promises of the campaign. That's not to say there's some small funny details that make it cool, like this weird jump scare enemy that comes out of viewing a cutscene on a castle from traveling on a train for 30 seconds or so. There's also some attention to detail here for some enemies, but some are just bizarre, like this room with a ghostly apparition and 5 music boxes that play music on top of the existing background music simultaneously. What is going on with this room? Can anyone tell me what the... But most will remember the designs of Symphony of the Night, simply for it being a more popular game. So you've got your own version of the Crusaderum, the Heaven Sword, and about 24 or so items and weapons and a whole bunch of enemies. The whole cooking and breaking down components to make cooking ingredients as well as for weapons and items makes this a very cool crafting game too. The great thing about cooking, not only is it tied into the series of quests for side character, that you get permanent buffs to the eating the first of any meal. So while you can only carry a certain number of potions, you can drag entire kitchens or pantries full of 99 units of complete meals of steak, fish dishes, crepes, all kinds of cookies. It's kind of silly. As a foodie, I find it rather entertaining. Some backers who spent crazy money got their portrait in the game, and portraits have a habit of attacking you, or being entire games. Too bad there was no story involved in any of this. Some backers who gave even more could design their own weapon, and for even more, you could turn your pet into an enemy. There are in fact 3 oversized animals in the game. 2 are dog heads, and 1 is a cat with a few palette swaps. So I guess that was successful? It's kind of funny, really. Not sure how well it fits into the lore of the game world, but here they are. Giant pet heads. Why not? In reality, it feels like every other Castlevania or Eggvania style game. If Iga was busy working on this and he just got fired from Konami, all he had to do was take what he was working on, change the names around, change some animation, and you wouldn't have noticed a difference. In some cases, he purposely kept names from the characters of the Castlevania franchise, where you have to hunt down and kill a random number of enemies to avenge some quest lines. You even get to fight Alucard, or their version of Orlok's Dracul, and take his time stop ability and his library books. And then there's some Trevor or Simon Zombie knockoff. There's a fire level, an ice level, an underwater series of levels. And instead of inverting the entire castle, you invert yourself. The game looks kind of plasticky. It's hard to describe the color palette and the look. I mean, it's bright and colorful at times, but most of the times it just feels kind of off. The soundtrack is mostly bland in comparison to the ethereal bliss that was Symphony of the Night. There are, of course, some good standout tracks, but it's mostly just meh. And I much prefer the Kojima artwork, but 2.5D is good too. There's also at least 3 moments in the Metroidvania formula where you're just completely lost. You eventually figure this out by talking to everyone and going everywhere again, but it's very confusing as to how or why, like knowing you have to get a passport to board a demon train, or even how to make one. Another horrible one is where the heck to find some sort of spike breaker armor to get past the spiky part of some level. Gee, doesn't that sound familiar? Where have I heard that before? Usually, you use walkthroughs or various guides to help you find hidden items or weapons, but not when you're trying to progress the story. That's just poor game design. Now, I've unlocked all the achievements, and some are pretty rewarding, and some are just obscure and you had no idea they existed. And the game design does suffer because of this, allowing some parts of the map to be clipped into, like when you have the acceleration shard where Miriam can just warp through walls into various levels. There are still some graphical glitches, like your passives don't always load visually, like beefing up your stats based on how much money you have, or the detection passive, which also collects close by items, stuff like that. And there's the fact that you're just some girl that the alchemists experimented on. That could have worked out really well, but you're not out for revenge. You're not Alucard torn between his love of his family and desire to stop his evil father and figure out why Richter went evil. There's no emotional thrust. There's no overall mystery. It's just go here, do that, kill these guys. That's it. So if you like Castlevania, you'll totally love this. You probably already backed it and have already played it. It's the best wide release of a Castlevania game next to Symphony of the Night, made by the maker of the original, so it's bound to be great. It's got some very good minor glitches and a few nerfs as the updates went by, but this is what we wanted, and Iga delivered.